The slap echoed louder than the engines, a sharp crack that cut through the cabin and froze every breath mid-air. For half a second, nobody moved. Not the woman clutching her purse in the aisle. Not the grey-haired man halfway out of his seat. Not even the flight attendant herself, her hand still trembling where it had just struck an older black man across the face. Someone whispered, "Jesus Christ." Someone else sucked in a breath so hard it sounded like pain. Earl Thompson did not fall. He did not raise his hands. He did not touch his cheek. He stood there, 65 years old, spine straight, shoulders squared out of habit, eyes steady, as if they were looking through her instead of at her. The sting bloomed slow and hot, but the deeper burn was older, heavier, a familiar one, the kind that never quite goes away. The cabin lights hummed. A baby started crying 3 rows back. The smell of coffee and jet fuel hung in the air, suddenly sour. 5 minutes earlier, nobody had noticed Earl Thompson at all. He had boarded late, not rushing, carrying a small scuffed duffel instead of a roller bag. Brown jacket, faded jeans, shoes polished out of routine, not vanity. To most eyes, he looked like another tired old man heading home from somewhere that did not matter. Someone you step around. Someone you do not ask questions about. Seat 17C. Middle. Earl had checked twice, not because he doubted himself, but because old habits die hard. He sat down carefully, knees tight against the seat in front of him, exhaled, and rested his hands on his thighs. The plane vibrated softly beneath him, alive and impatient. That should have been the end of it. But when the woman across the aisle struggled to lift her carry-on, Earl stood without thinking. His joints protested, but he ignored them, reached up, and slid the bag into the bin with practiced efficiency. No fuss, no comment. That was when the voice snapped. "Sir, sit down. Now." It carried authority, sharpened into a blade. Flight attendant uniform, blonde hair pulled tight. Name tag reading Melissa Grant, early 40s, perfect posture, perfect smile that never quite reached her eyes. Earl turned, surprised more than offended. He gave a small nod, just helping her out. Melissa stepped closer, too close. Her heels clicked once, deliberate. "That's not your job. You need to stay seated and follow instructions." Her tone drew eyes. A few heads turned. Earl felt it immediately, that subtle shift when attention sharpens into judgment. He lowered his voice. "Ma'am, the bin was open. She couldn't, I said, sit down." The word landed hard. Sit, like a command to a dog. Earl looked at her for a moment, not angry, measuring. Something flickered behind his eyes, then vanished. He sat. The woman he had helped mouthed, "Thank you," embarrassed, shrinking into her seat. That should have been the end of it, too. But Melissa did not move away. Instead, she lingered, scanning Earl from head to toe, as if she had misplaced something and suspected it might be him. Her jaw tightened, her shoulders squared. "People like you always think the rules don't apply," she said, not loud enough to announce, not quiet enough to hide. A ripple went through the row. Someone coughed. Someone else shifted uncomfortably. Earl felt his chest tighten. Not fear. Memory. He had heard that sentence before, in other uniforms, in other decades, on other sides of locked doors. He met her gaze. "I didn't break any rules." Her smile sharpened. "Don't argue with me on my aircraft." "Your aircraft." The words settled between them like a challenge. Earl leaned back, slow, deliberate. His voice stayed calm. "I'm not arguing. I'm asking you to speak to me with respect." That was the moment. Melissa's face flushed. Her eyes flicked to the surrounding passengers. Phones were half raised now, not openly recording yet, but ready. She saw them, felt them, and something in her snapped. She straightened, volume rising, controls slipping. "You do not get to tell me how to do my job. If you cause one more issue, I will have you removed from this plane." A man in the aisle seat muttered, "This is ridiculous." An older woman shook her head slowly, lips pressed thin. Earl stood again. Not fast, not aggressive, just tall enough now that she had to tilt her head up to look at him. "Ma'am," he said, each word steady, "you need to step back." For a split second, uncertainty flashed across her face. Then it vanished, replaced by fury. "Who do you think you are?" The question hung there, heavy, loaded. Earl did not answer. Melissa laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "Or what? You're going to intimidate me? You people always." Her hand moved before the sentence finished. The slap landed. Now, in the silence afterward, time stretched thin. Earl tasted copper. His cheek burned. The cabin felt smaller, tighter, like the walls had leaned in. Melissa's breathing was fast, uneven. She had gone too far. She knew it. Everyone knew it. A man 2 rows up stood. "You can't do that!" Another voice followed. "That's assault!" Phones came up fully now, screens glowing, red dots blinking. Earl raised one hand. Not to strike, to stop. It was an old gesture, commanding, final. He turned away from her, slowly, deliberately, and faced the front of the plane. His voice carried, low and calm, cutting through the chaos like steel through cloth. "I need to speak to the captain. Now." Melissa lunged forward, grabbing at his sleeve. "You're not going anywhere." Earl did not shake her off. He simply removed her hand, gently, as if correcting a child. "Do not touch me again." The words were quiet. They landed harder than the slap. A younger flight attendant stood frozen near the galley, eyes wide, hands trembling. Earl looked at her. "Miss, please inform the cockpit that there has been a crew conduct incident involving physical assault." The young woman swallowed, nodded, ran. Melissa stared at Earl like she was seeing him for the first time. "You think you can just make demands?" Earl finally turned back to her. His eyes were cold now, clear, focused. "No, ma'am," he said. "I think you just made one very bad decision." The plane did not move. The engines idled. Somewhere in the distance a door opened, and beneath the hum of the aircraft, beneath the whispers and the recording phones and the rising tension, a countdown had begun. 5 minutes. And Melissa Grant had no idea who she had just put her hands on. The cockpit door did not open right away, and in that pause the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath, suspended between disbelief and anticipation. Earl Thompson remained standing in the aisle, hands relaxed at his sides, posture calm enough to look almost indifferent, though his pulse beat steadily in his ears. He could feel the eyes on him now, not curious anymore. Measuring, recalculating. Melissa Grant backed away one step, then another, as if distance alone might undo what she had done. Her mouth opened, closed. She looked around for allies and found none. A man in a windbreaker shook his head slowly. A woman across the aisle crossed her arms tight against her chest. The older couple Earl had helped stared straight ahead, ashamed, grateful, shaken all at once. "You need to sit down," Melissa said, forcing her voice into something official. "You're disrupting the cabin." Earl did not move. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He simply waited. The younger flight attendant returned from the galley, face pale, eyes darting between Melissa and Earl. "The captain is on his way," she said quietly. That did it. A murmur rolled through the cabin, low and restless. Someone whispered, "Good."
Someone else muttered, "About time." Melissa spun on the younger attendant. "You shouldn't have said anything like that in front of passengers." The girl flinched. "I had to report it."
She hit him. Melissa's jaw tightened. "Watch your mouth." Earl felt the familiar tightening in his chest again. Not anger, responsibility. He turned slightly so his body shielded the younger attendant without touching her. "You did the right thing," he said softly. The girl nodded, eyes glassy. Footsteps approached from the front, heavy, unhurried. Captain Daniel Reeves emerged into the cabin. Late 50s, silver hair, eyes that had seen too much to be easily impressed. He took in the scene in one sweep. The phones, the passengers standing, Earl in the aisle, Melissa rigid and flushed. "What happened?" Captain Reeves asked. Melissa answered immediately. "This passenger became aggressive and refused to follow crew instructions." A few people laughed. Not humor, disbelief. Earl waited until the sound died. "Captain," he said, calm and clear, "I was assaulted by your lead flight attendant after helping another passenger with their luggage." Reeves's eyes flicked to Earl's cheek, already red, already swelling. Then to Melissa's trembling hand. "Is that true, Melissa?" She swallowed. "He challenged my authority." "Did you strike him?" Silence. Captain Reeves did not raise his voice. "Did you strike him?" Melissa's shoulders sagged a fraction. "I lost my temper." The cabin exhaled as one. Reeves nodded once, slow. "All right." He turned to Earl. "Sir, I'm going to need a statement from you. For now, please remain here." Earl inclined his head. "Of course." Reeves turned back to Melissa. "You're relieved of duty for the remainder of this flight. Security has been notified." Her eyes widened. "You can't do that." "I just did." The words landed with finality. The captain spoke into his radio, voice steady, procedural. "Ground, this is Flight 618. We have a crew conduct issue involving physical assault, requesting airport security at the gate." Melissa's breath came fast now. "This is a misunderstanding." "No," Captain Reeves said. "It's not." Two uniformed airport security officers boarded within minutes. Not rushed, not aggressive, efficient. The kind of calm that only comes with experience. "Ma'am," one of them said to Melissa, "we need you to come with us." She looked around wildly. "You can't let this happen. He provoked me." No one spoke up for her. As she was escorted toward the door, phones followed, unblinking. Melissa's face crumpled, anger giving way to something raw and panicked. "This isn't over," she said, her voice breaking. Earl watched her go without expression. The door closed behind her with a soft, final thud. Captain Reeves turned back to the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be delaying departure briefly. Thank you for your patience." A few people clapped, tentative at first, then steadier. Not loud, respectful. Earl sat down slowly. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving behind a deep, bone-level fatigue. A man across the aisle leaned over. "You didn't deserve that, sir." Earl nodded. "Thank you." The older woman he had helped reached across the aisle and touched his sleeve. "God bless you," she whispered. Earl managed a small smile. Captain Reeves approached again, crouching slightly to be at eye level. "Sir, I need to apologize on behalf of the airline." "I appreciate that," Earl said. Reeves studied him for a moment. "You handled that with a lot of restraint." Earl's eyes drifted to the window, the tarmac glowing orange in the late afternoon sun. "Years of practice," he said. Reeves hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Security will want to speak with you briefly once we're back at the gate. Just standard procedure." "Of course." As the captain moved away, a man in a business suit slid into the aisle seat beside Earl. He smelled faintly of aftershave and nerves. "You okay, man?" Earl nodded. "I will be." The man hesitated. "I'm retired Navy." "That took guts." Earl met his gaze. "No, it took patience." The plane rolled back to the gate, the engines winding down. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Passengers stood, stretching, murmuring, replaying the moment in hushed voices. Some looked at Earl with open respect now, others with something closer to awe. A few with discomfort, as if confronting a truth they'd rather avoid. Airport security returned, this time with a clipboard and careful eyes. "Sir, we'll need to take a brief statement." Earl stood, smoothing his jacket. "Certainly." As he followed them toward the front, the younger flight attendant stepped aside, eyes shining. "Thank you," she said. Earl paused. "For what?" "For standing up. For all of us." He nodded once and continued. In the jet bridge, the air felt cooler, heavier. The noise of the terminal seeped in. Security let into a quiet corner. One officer spoke gently. "We're going to document what happened. You're not in any trouble." "I know," Earl said. They asked questions. Times, words, actions. Earl answered plainly, precisely. No embellishment, no anger. When it was done, the officer closed his notebook. "Sir, is there anything else we should know?" Earl considered the question. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes," he said finally. "There is." The officer waited. Earl met his eyes, steady and unblinking. "What happened on that plane didn't start with a slap." The officer nodded slowly, sensing the weight behind the words. Earl looked back through the glass of the aircraft, passengers still inside. The younger attendant standing alone near the galley, the captain conferring with ground staff. Systems adjusting, narratives shifting. This wasn't finished, not even close. Somewhere above the noise of the terminal, a deeper current had begun to move, slow and unstoppable, carrying consequences far beyond one flight, one slap, one woman who thought power meant control. And for the first time since boarding, Earl Thompson felt something stir beneath the calm. Resolve. The news did not break with sirens or headlines. It spread quietly at first, phone to phone, screen to screen, carried by shaky hands and hushed voices. By the time Earl Thompson finished giving his statement, the video had already crossed the invisible line between an incident and a reckoning. Inside the terminal, people stared at their phones, then up at him, then back down again, as if unsure what they were allowed to see. A gate agent pretended not to look. A man with a ball cap whispered, "That's him." Earl kept walking, escorted now more by gravity than by security. His face felt tight, the swelling pulling at his skin, but he did not touch it. He had learned long ago that the body heals faster than dignity. The airline operations manager arrived breathless, suit wrinkled, badge swinging. She spoke in apologies before introductions, words tumbling over each other. "We're so sorry, Mr. Thompson. We take these matters very seriously. The company does not condone—" Earl raised a hand, stopping the speech without a word. He looked at her then. Really looked. She was young enough to be his daughter, older than the girl in the cabin, younger than the woman who had struck him. Her eyes were earnest, afraid, doing what she was trained to do. "I understand," he said. "Let's just handle what needs to be handled." She nodded gratefully, relieved by his tone, and gestured toward a small conference room off the concourse. The room smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner. A flag hung crooked in the corner. Earl sat, folding his hands, listening as policies were explained, as timelines were outlined, as assurances were made. He had heard them all before. When they finished, there was a silence that felt heavier than the slap. The operations manager cleared her throat. Sir, there's one more thing. She slid her phone across the table. On the screen, frozen mid-motion, was Melissa Grant's face, twisted in anger. Her hand raised, Earl's cheek turned toward her. The timestamp glowed in the corner. Undeniable. It's everywhere now, the manager said quietly. News stations, veteran groups, the airline union. Corporate wants to know if you're willing to make a statement. Earl studied the image. Not himself, not her. The moment between them. The space where a choice had been made. Not yet, he said. The manager nodded, though she clearly did not understand. Of course. Take all the time you need. As she left, Earl leaned back and closed his eyes. The noise of the terminal seeped through the walls, muffled but constant. Rolling bags, announcements, lives moving on. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He did not need to look to know who it was. He answered on the second ring. Yeah? A voice on the other end, low, controlled, edged with something dangerous beneath the calm. I just saw the footage. Earl exhaled slowly. That didn't take long. It didn't, the voice said. Are you all right? I'll be fine. A pause, then, that woman had no idea. No, Earl said. She didn't. Another silence. This one heavier, more deliberate. We can shut this down if you want, the voice offered. Quietly, statements get buried, careers get redirected. It wouldn't be the first time. Earl opened his eyes. The crooked flag stared back at him. No, he said. Let it run. You sure? I'm sure. The voice softened, just a fraction. That's going to make things uncomfortable. Earl's mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. It already has. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Across the terminal, a group of men in faded jackets stood together, watching him. One wore a Marine Corps hat. Another leaned on a cane with an army insignia carved into the handle. They did not approach. They did not need to. The nod they gave him carried more weight than any applause. Back on the plane, Captain Reeves sat alone in the cockpit, hands resting on his knees, staring through the glass. He had flown for over 30 years. He had seen tempers flare. He had broken up fights at 30,000 feet. But this was different. This was rot, exposed under bright cabin lights. The younger flight attendant sat 2 rows back, shoulders shaking, tears finally falling now that it was over. Another attendant sat beside her, murmuring reassurances that sounded hollow even to her own ears. Reeves stood, straightened his jacket, and stepped back into the cabin. He addressed the crew, voice steady, eyes hard. We are going to finish this flight professionally. When we land, there will be interviews, investigations. I expect honesty from all of you. No one spoke. As the plane finally pushed back from the gate, the delay clock ticked upward, but no one complained. The cabin was subdued now, reflective. People stared out windows or at nothing at all. In the conference room, Earl rose, joints creaking, and stepped back into the terminal. A reporter spotted him and hurried over, microphone already raised. Mr. Thompson, can you comment on what happened on the flight? Earl stopped. Cameras clicked. A small crowd gathered, drawn by instinct and outrage. He looked into the lens, into the collective hunger for a soundbite, a villain, a hero. Not today, he said evenly. He turned away, walking toward the exit, each step unhurried, deliberate. The reporter called after him, Sir, are you a veteran? Earl paused, just once. Yes, he said, and kept walking. Outside, the late afternoon sun dipped low, painting the concrete in gold and shadow. A black sedan idled at the curb. The driver stepped out, opening the door without a word. As Earl slid into the back seat, the weight of the day finally settled into his bones. The driver pulled away from the terminal, merging into traffic that flowed on, indifferent. Earl watched the airport recede in the window, planes rising and falling like slow breaths against the sky. He had not planned for this. He had boarded a flight to go home, to sit on his porch, to drink coffee and listen to the quiet. Instead, he had become a fault line. His phone buzzed again, this time a message. No name, just words. Board meeting moved up, tomorrow morning. All hands. Earl closed his eyes. The machine had noticed the tremor. And soon, it would feel the quake. By the time the car reached the highway, the sun had slipped behind the skyline, leaving the city washed in steel grey and amber. Earl Thompson sat in silence, hands folded, eyes fixed on the passing lights. The slap replayed in fragments, not as pain, but as sound. Skin on skin. Gasps. The sharp intake of breath from a cabin full of strangers who suddenly realized they were part of something larger than a delayed flight. The driver glanced at him once in the rearview mirror, then back to the road. No questions. Earl appreciated that. The phone in his pocket vibrated again. He ignored it this time. Some conversations needed space before they could be had. At a stoplight, a veteran stood on the median holding a cardboard sign, his jacket too thin for the evening chill. Earl watched him carefully. The man looked tired, not broken, the way tired only comes from years of being told to endure quietly. The light turned green. The car moved on. Earl felt the familiar ache settle low in his chest. He had worn a uniform once, for decades. He had learned early that silence could be both armor and cage. The sedan turned into a quiet residential street, lined with modest homes and bare winter trees. Earl's house sat at the end, porch light already on. He thanked the driver and stepped out, the cool air hitting his face, tightening the swelling along his cheek. The quiet here was different. Honest. No hum of engines, no recorded announcements. Just wind through branches and the distant bark of a dog. Inside, the house smelled faintly of old wood and lemon cleaner. He set his bag down by the door, loosened his jacket, and stood for a long moment in the dim light of the living room. Framed photographs lined the wall. A younger Earl in uniform, standing straight, eyes hard. A woman beside him, smiling. Gone now. A group of soldiers, arms slung over each other's shoulders, all of them younger than the years they would later carry. Earl touched the frame lightly, then turned away. He poured a glass of water and drank it slowly, feeling the tightness in his throat ease. The mirror above the sink caught his reflection. The mark on his cheek had darkened, blooming purple beneath the skin. He studied it without judgment. So this is what it takes now, he thought. Not bullets, not orders. Just one moment, caught on camera. The phone vibrated again, persistent. He answered. You should see what's happening, the voice said without greeting. Older, female, someone who had known him before the grey settled in. I can imagine, Earl replied. It's worse than that. Veterans groups are organizing. Civil rights organizations too. The airline's stock dipped this afternoon. The unions already distancing themselves. Earl closed his eyes. And Melissa. A pause. She's been suspended pending investigation. The airline issued a statement. Careful language. No admission of fault yet. He nodded, though she couldn't see it. And the crew. Internal review. Interviews tomorrow. They're nervous. Good, Earl said quietly. There it was. Not anger, not vengeance. Something colder, more precise. You're still planning to stay quiet? She asked. For now.
Another pause. "Earl, you know what this becomes if you don't steer it." "I do." "You don't have to carry this alone." He looked around the room, at the empty chair across from him. "I've carried heavier." She exhaled, long and slow. "That's exactly what worries me." They hung up. Earl sat at the kitchen table as darkness settled fully outside. Somewhere, a television murmured through a neighbor's wall. Life continued. It always did. Across town, Melissa Grant sat in her car, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles had gone white. She had driven aimlessly for nearly an hour, replaying the moment again and again, trying to find the place where it had gone wrong. In her mind, she kept stopping just before the slap, imagining herself stepping back, choosing differently. But the memory never changed. Her phone buzzed, messages stacked unread. Her mother, her sister, a co-worker who wrote, "I can't believe you did that." Another who wrote nothing at all. She slammed the phone onto the passenger seat and leaned forward, forehead against the wheel. This wasn't who she was. She told herself that, over and over. She had worked hard. She had followed rules. She had kept order. That man had challenged her in front of everyone. Challenged. The word echoed. In a quiet office downtown, Captain Reeves sat with his jacket draped over the back of his chair, hands clasped, listening as an airline attorney spoke in careful, measured tones. Procedures, liability, optics. Reeves nodded when appropriate, said little. When the lawyer finished, Reeves leaned forward. "You want my honest opinion?" The attorney hesitated. "Of course." "We failed before that plane ever left the gate," Reeves said. "Not just her. All of us." The attorney frowned. "Captain, I'd been flying since before half your staff was born. I know the difference between enforcing rules and enforcing ego. And I know what happens when we confuse the two." Silence filled the room. Reeves stood. "My report will reflect exactly what I saw." As he left, the attorney watched him go, unease creeping into her expression. This wasn't a storm that could be managed with press releases alone. Back in his house, Earl finally turned on the television. Every channel showed the same still image. The slap frozen in time. Analysts debated. Commentators argued. Faces Earl had never seen spoke his name with familiarity. He turned it off. His phone buzzed once more. This time, a text. From a number he hadn't saved. "They moved the meeting to 8 tomorrow morning. Full board. You'll be there." Earl stared at the words. He had not planned to be there. He had not planned for any of this. But plans were a luxury for quieter days. He typed back, "I'll be there." He set the phone down and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The house creaked softly around him, settling. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the bare branches against the window. This was no longer about a slap on a plane. It hadn't been from the moment that hand came down. It was about lines drawn long ago. About who was allowed to speak, who was allowed to stand, who was expected to sit down and be grateful. Earl closed his eyes, breath steady, mind sharpening. Tomorrow, the questions would come, and this time, he would answer them. The boardroom smelled of polished wood and old money, the kind of room designed to remind people where power was supposed to live. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city, but the blinds were half-drawn, muting the morning light into narrow bands across the long table. 8 men and 3 women sat spaced evenly apart, jackets folded, coffee untouched. They had been waiting. Earl Thompson stood at the far end, alone, hands resting lightly on the chair in front of him. He had not sat down. He would not, unless invited. That was how he'd been raised. That was how he'd survived. The screen behind him froze on a familiar image. Melissa Grant's hand mid-arc. His face turned away.
a moment the entire country now knew by heart. The chairman cleared his throat. "Oh, thank you for coming on such short notice." Earl inclined his head. "You asked." A man to the chairman's left spoke next, voice smooth, practiced. "We want to start by saying how deeply we regret what happened to you." Earl said nothing. Another executive leaned forward, fingers steepled. "This incident has caused significant reputational damage to the airline, to our partners, to our investors." There it was, the real injury. Earl finally spoke. "You didn't call me here to talk about..." "I declined, because I wanted to see how you handled power when you..." "What do you want?" There it was, the real question. Earl stopped at the head of the table. He did not sit. "I want you to stop calling this an incident." A few brows furrowed. "Call it what it is," he continued. "A failure. Not of one woman, of leadership." The legal counsel leaned forward. "Earl, with respect, public admissions carry risk." Earl met her gaze. "So does Simons." Another executive spoke, quieter now. "What exactly are you proposing?" Earl inhaled slowly. "Full transparency, independent review. Not one you control, not one you can soften. That would expose us," the silver cufflink man snapped. "Good," Earl said. The word landed like a dropped gavel. The chairman stared at him. "You realize what this could cost?" Earl nodded. "I do. I also realize what it already costs, every day, to people you never see." A long pause. The youngest board member, a woman who had not spoken yet, cleared her throat. "My father flew for this airline for 26 years. He retired early because he said something felt wrong. No one listened." She looked around the room. "Maybe we should start." The room shifted. Not agreement, but doubt. The first crack. Earl felt it. Pressure changing. Across town, in a small apartment with the curtains drawn, Melissa Grant sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone. Notifications stacked faster than she could read them. Her union representative had called twice, HR once, her mother 6 times. She hadn't answered any of them. On the television, a former executive spoke about accountability, about values. Words Melissa had used herself. She muted it and let the silence swallow the room. She had been so sure, so certain she was right. That man had looked at her like she was nothing, like she wasn't in control. Now she understood something too late. Control was never hers. Back in the boardroom, the chairman exhaled slowly. "If we do this," he said, "there's no undoing it." Earl's voice softened, just slightly. "Neither is a slap." The chairman closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, something had changed. "All right," the word echoed. "We authorize an independent review, full access, findings made public." The silver cufflink man looked like he might protest, then thought better of it. Earl nodded once. "Thank you." The chairman hesitated. "And you?" Earl waited. "We'd like you to oversee it." A few heads snapped up. Earl considered the offer. Power returned. Leverage acknowledged. "I'll do it," he said. "But not for you." The chairman swallowed. "For whom, then?" Earl's gaze drifted back to the frozen image on the screen. "For the people who never make it into this room." He turned and walked toward the door. Behind him, the boardroom buzzed with quiet panic, whispered calculations, and the first realization that this was no longer a crisis to be managed. It was a reckoning already in motion. And Earl Thompson, the man they had once underestimated, had just stepped into the center of it. The fallout did not arrive all at once. It moved like weather, slow and inevitable, rolling across departments, offices, lives that had never expected to be touched by one man standing up in an airplane aisle. By noon, the internal memo went out. Not a press release, not a public apology. An internal directive stamped confidential, distributed to every regional manager, every training supervisor, every executive whose name never appeared on a boarding pass. Independent review authorized. Full cooperation mandatory. No interference, no coaching, no retaliation. People read it twice, some 3 times. In break rooms and glass offices, conversations dropped to whispers. Eyes shifted. Old stories resurfaced. Moments that had once been brushed off as misunderstandings now felt heavier, darker, impossible to unsee. At a training center outside Phoenix, a senior instructor paused mid-sentence as her phone buzzed. She scanned the message, color draining from her face. She dismissed the class early, without explanation, hands trembling as she gathered her notes. She had been there when Melissa Grant was promoted. She had signed off on the evaluation. Strong presence, commanding, knows how to assert authority. The words stared back at her now, like an accusation. In a regional operations office in Ohio, a supervisor deleted an email draft he had almost sent months ago. Subject line: passenger complaint follow-up. He remembered reading it. Remembered thinking the passenger sounded difficult. Remembered deciding it wasn't worth the trouble. Across the country, the system began to sweat. Earl Thompson sat in a quiet office borrowed from the airline's legal department. The door closed, blinds half open. He had refused the corner office offered to him. Too much glass, too much theater. He preferred a room where voices carried honestly. A stack of folders sat on the table. Complaints, incident reports, internal notes. Not just from the last year, but from the last 10. Patterns emerged quickly once someone was willing to look. He moved slowly through them, methodical, precise. Years of command had taught him that urgency without clarity only bred mistakes. Every page told a small story. A raised voice, a humiliation dismissed, a passenger labeled disruptive without context, a crew member praised for keeping control. Control. The word appeared everywhere. There was a knock at the door. "Come in." Captain Reeves stepped inside, jacket off now, sleeves rolled, face drawn but steady. He closed the door behind him. "They're pushing back," Reeves said without preamble. Earl nodded. "Of course they are." Reeves leaned against the desk. Legal is nervous. HR is defensive. A few senior folks think this is going to turn into a witch hunt. Earl looked up. "And what do you think?" Reeves hesitated, then said it. "I think we've been letting the wrong people feel safe for too long." Earl studied him. Not for honesty, for courage. He found both. "Good," Earl said. "Then you'll be useful." Reeves almost smiled. A notification chimed softly on Earl's laptop. He glanced at the screen. Another request, another name, another interview scheduled. "They're lining up," Reeves said. "People want to talk." "I know. Not all of them for good reasons." Earl closed the folder in front of him. Truth doesn't require pure motives, just open mouths. Reeves exhaled. "There's something else." He slid a tablet across the desk. On the screen, paused, was footage from a different flight, different year, different attendant, different passenger. Same posture, same tone, same escalation. Earl's jaw tightened. He watched the clip without comment. The passenger in the video was younger, louder. He argued back. Security removed him. The report cited disruptive behavior. The comment section beneath the clip, now resurfaced, was brutal. People calling him aggressive, unstable, uncooperative. No slap this time, Reeves said quietly. Just words. But the pattern's there. Earl nodded. Patterns always are. Across town, in a narrow apartment with mismatched furniture and drawn curtains, Melissa Grant sat on the floor, back against the couch, phone in her lap. She had finally answered the union representative. They're recommending distance, the man had said carefully. At least for now. Distance from what? She asked, her voice thin. From statements, from interviews, from social media. Let things cool. She laughed then, a short, hollow sound. Cool. You think this cools down? The representative had no answer. When the call ended, Melissa stared at the wall. She had replayed the flight 1,000 times now, each pass stripping away another layer of justification. She remembered the looks, the phones, the moment his eyes changed. She had thought power was about not being questioned. She had been wrong. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a message from a number she did not recognize. Independent review request. You are required to appear for interview. Failure to comply may result in termination. Melissa dropped the phone like it burned. In a quiet neighborhood, far from airports and boardrooms, Earl's house sat dark. He had not been home since the meeting. The porch light stayed off. The quiet waited. At a diner down the road, a group of veterans sat around a scarred table, coffee cups refilled without asking. The television over the counter played the footage on a loop. No sound, just the image. That's him, one of them said softly. Another nodded. Took a spine to do what he did. A third man, younger than the rest, frowned. They'll come for him. The oldest of them all, a man with a silver star pin on his jacket, shook his head. No. They already did. He's still standing. Back in the office, the first interview began. Earl sat across from a senior training manager, a woman in her 50s, with perfect posture and tired eyes. She clasped her hands tightly, knuckles white. I've reviewed your materials, Earl said evenly. I want to hear your experience. She hesitated, then spoke. Slowly at first, then faster. Stories spilled out. Things she had flagged and been told to soften. Behaviors she had been asked to reframe as firmness. Complaints she had been encouraged to close quietly. When she finished, the room felt heavier. Earl nodded. Thank you. She swallowed. Am I in trouble? Earl met her gaze. That depends on what you do next. Outside the office, the building hummed with quiet anxiety. People avoided eye contact. Doors closed softly. The machine, once confident in its routines, now felt watched. This was no longer about one flight attendant. It was about a system that had mistaken silence for order and obedience for safety. And somewhere beneath the layers of policy and fear, something older was stirring. Accountability. It does not arrive with noise. It arrives with records, with names, with consequences. And it does not ask permission. The pressure found Earl Thompson in small, ordinary moments. A door that closed a little too quietly behind him. A conversation that stopped when he entered the room. The way people began to choose their words with care, as if language itself had become a liability. By the end of the week, the Independent Review had a name, a staff, and a mandate that scared the right people. Subpoena authority. Full access to internal records. No carve-outs. No quiet settlements. The board signed off because they had no other choice. Investors were circling. Regulators were watching. Silence was no longer neutral. It was evidence. Earl worked from before sunrise until well past dark. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was precise. He did not promise protection. He did not offer absolution. He asked for facts. He waited for the truth to catch up. It did. A senior HR director broke down during her interview, mascara streaking as she confessed to closing cases she knew should have stayed open. A regional manager admitted, off the record at first, that certain complaints were flagged as high risk and rerouted away from review if the wrong names were attached. A training supervisor described a scoring system that quietly rewarded dominance over de-escalation. Earl wrote everything down. Outside the office, the world grew louder. Cable news panels argued late into the night. Commentators dissected his posture, his tone, his silence. Some called him dignified. Others called him dangerous. A few questioned his motives, wondering aloud what a retired soldier was really after. He did not answer. The airline's stock wobbled, recovered, then wobbled again. Advertisers called. Partners demanded assurances. The union released a statement that said very little while implying much. Lawyers sent letters, lots of them. One afternoon, a man Earl had never met appeared in the doorway of his office without knocking. Tall, impeccable suit, smile that arrived late and left early. "Mr. Thompson," he said. "Name's Richard Hale, corporate counsel, external." Earl gestured to the chair. "Sit." Hale did not sit. "I'll be brief. I'm sure you will." Hale clasped his hands. "The company is prepared to offer a comprehensive settlement, public apology, compensation, policy reforms. Your involvement would conclude quietly." Earl leaned back. "You want me to go away?" Hale smiled thinly. "We want closure." Earl's eyes hardened. Closure comes after accountability. Hale's tone cooled. "There are other considerations. Your past, your affiliations, the things people might misunderstand if they dig too far." There it was. Not a threat, a reminder. Earl stood. "You're done here." Hale blinked.
"I beg your—"
"You're done," Earl repeated, his voice flat. "If you contact me again, do it through the review, or don't do it at all." Hale studied him for a moment, recalibrating. Then he nodded once and left. Captain Reeves found Earl later that evening, standing by the window, watching planes lift into the dark like slow-moving stars. "They're testing you," Reeves said. Earl nodded. "That's how you know you're close." Reeves hesitated. "There's something you should see." He handed Earl a folder. Inside were printouts, old emails, calendar invites, performance reviews written in coded language that now read like confession. At the center of it all was a name that kept appearing. Not Melissa Grant. Someone higher. Someone insulated. Earl's jaw tightened. "How long?" Reeves exhaled. "Long enough." Across town, Melissa Grant sat in a bare conference room, hands folded, a recorder blinking red on the table. The interviewer's voice was calm, neutral, trained. "Walk us through the incident." Melissa spoke slowly at first, choosing words like stepping stones across deep water. She described rules, procedures, authority. She avoided the slap. The interviewer waited. When she finally reached it, her voice cracked. "I didn't mean to hurt him." "But you did." Melissa nodded, tears spilling. "I felt exposed. He wouldn't back down. Everyone was watching." "Why did that matter?" Melissa opened her mouth, then closed it. "Because if I lost control, I lost everything." The interviewer did not respond. Silence did the work. In the veterans' hall on the edge of town, folding chairs filled the room. Earl stood at the front, Not on a stage, just among them. Men and women of different ages, different wars, different scars. They didn't ask him to speak. He did anyway. "This isn't about one airline," he said. "It's about what happens when institutions forget who they serve." A man in the back raised his hand. "You sure you want to keep pushing? They don't like it when you do." Earl met his eyes. "I didn't do this to be liked." A few nods, a few murmured approvals. No applause. That night, alone in his house, Earl finally allowed himself to sit in the dark. The weight of the days pressed down. The phone lay silent on the table. For the first time since the flight, he felt the edge of doubt. Then the phone lit up. A message. Short. Direct. "We need to talk. In person. Tomorrow morning. 8 sharp." No signature. Earl stared at the screen. He knew who it was from. He had known this moment was coming. The next morning, the room was smaller than he expected. No board table, no assistants. Just 2 chairs and a man in his early 60s with a calm smile and eyes that missed nothing. "Thank you for coming," the man said, extending a hand. "I'm Michael Carter." Earl shook it. "I know who you are." Carter nodded. "You should. I run this company." Earl sat. Carter leaned forward. "I've watched you for a long time, Earl. Longer than this incident. Longer than this review." Earl said nothing. "You turned down a seat at this table once," Carter continued. "That intrigued me." "I don't sit at tables that don't listen," Earl replied. Carter smiled faintly. "That's why you're here." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents Earl had never seen. Ownership structures, voting rights, names that explained a great deal. "You think this is about fixing training," Carter said quietly. "It's bigger than that." Earl looked up, eyes sharp. Carter met his gaze. "You're not here to advise us, Earl." He paused. "You're here to help me clean house." The air shifted. Earl closed the folder. His voice was low. "Then you waited too long." Carter nodded. "Yes, I did." They sat in silence, 2 men who understood power not as noise, but as consequence. Outside, planes rose and fell. Inside, something older than policy was being decided. And for the first time since the slap, Earl Thompson felt the shape of the endgame come into focus. Michael Carter did not speak again until he poured the coffee himself. No assistant, no ceremony. Just 2 cups on a small table that had never been meant for decisions this heavy. The room was quiet, in the way powerful rooms always are, insulated from consequence until consequence knocks. Earl watched Carter's hands. Steady, confident. Hands that had signed papers altering thousands of lives without ever meeting them. "You waited until it was impossible to ignore," Earl said finally. Carter handed him the cup. "I waited until it was undeniable." "That's not the same thing." Carter sat back, unoffended. "No, it isn't. But it's the truth." He took a sip, eyes never leaving Earl. "This company grew fast. Faster than its conscience. We patched problems instead of fixing them. We rewarded results and told ourselves culture would follow." Earl let the words settle. "That's how rot spreads." Carter nodded once. "Yes. And now it's visible. To regulators, to shareholders, to the public. And to you." Earl set the cup down untouched. "You didn't call me here to confess." "No," Carter said. "I called you here because I need someone who doesn't owe me anything." "You think that's me?" "I know it is." Carter slid another folder across the table. This one thinner, cleaner. Inside were names Earl recognized from the review, senior leadership, training heads, legal intermediaries, all connected by threads that had been invisible until now. They're preparing to sacrifice a few people, Carter said. Courtney exits. Generous severance. They think that will satisfy you. Earl looked up. It won't. I know. That's why I'm stepping in. Earl's voice hardened. Stepping in how? Carter leaned forward. Publicly. I'm removing 3 executives by the end of the week. No golden parachutes. No quiet transfers. I'm restructuring training from the ground up. And I'm turning the findings of the review over to the regulators myself. Earl searched his face. And why should I believe you? Because if I don't, Carter said calmly, you will burn this company down to the studs. And you'll be right to do it. The honesty surprised Earl more than any promise could have. Across town, the interview room door closed softly behind Melissa Grant. She sat alone now, the recorder off, the questions finished. The air felt thin. She rubbed her hands together, trying to warm them, though the room was not cold. The interviewer had been kind. Too kind. That made it worse. Melissa stared at the table, at the faint scratch marks left by others who had sat there before her. People who had thought they were in control until they weren't. Her phone buzzed. One message. From the union. They won't represent you if charges are filed. She closed her eyes. For the first time since the flight, she did not feel angry. She felt small. Exposed. The narrative she had built around herself had collapsed, leaving only the truth she had avoided. She had liked power. Liked how it felt when people obeyed. Liked the certainty of being right because no one challenged her. And when someone did, she struck. The slap echoed again in her mind, louder now than it had been on the plane. Back in the office, Earl stood by the window, watching a cargo plane taxi slowly across the tarmac. He spoke without turning. If you do this, you don't control what comes next. Carter joined him at the glass. I'm aware. There will be lawsuits. Yes. Criminal exposure. Possibly. You may lose your seat. Carter smiled faintly. I've already decided I can live with that. Earl turned then, studying him closely. Why now? Carter met his gaze. Because my granddaughter flew on that plane yesterday. She watched the video before I did. The room went quiet. She asked me why the man didn't fight back, Carter continued. She asked why the woman thought she could hit him. She asked what I was going to do about it. Earl nodded slowly. Children always ask the right questions. Carter exhaled. I don't want her growing up thinking silence is strength. Neither do I. They stood there, 2 men from different worlds, bound now by a line that could not be uncrossed. Later that afternoon, the announcement went out. Not a leak, not a rumor. A formal statement, issued by the CEO himself. Names named, positions vacated, investigations opened, cooperation pledged. The response was immediate. Phones rang off the hook. Markets dipped. Commentators scrambled to rewrite their scripts. Some praised the move. Others called it a calculated sacrifice. Earl watched none of it. He sat in a quiet room with the review team, listening as the final interviews came in. The stories grew heavier, clearer, harder to dismiss. One by one, the excuses ran out. That evening, Earl returned home for the first time in days. The porch light flicked on as he stepped up, motion sensor humming. Inside, the house greeted him with familiar stillness. He set his jacket down, sank into the chair by the window, and let the quiet settle. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Thank you for not letting this disappear. No signature. He typed back nothing. Across the city, Melissa Grant packed a box under the watchful eyes of HR. Her nameplate lay in the box, upside down. She moved mechanically, every sound too loud in the empty office. As she walked out, she caught her reflection in the glass. Older, smaller, stripped of certainty. She did not look away. At a veterans center that night, Earl stood again among familiar faces. No cameras, no microphones, just people. Someone asked if it was over. Earl shook his head. It's never over. It just moves. A man near the back asked, was it worth it? Earl thought of the slap, the boardroom, the folder, the granddaughter's question. Yes, he said, because now it's on record. Outside, the night air was cool, the sky clear. Planes traced white lines overhead, steady and indifferent. Tomorrow, regulators would step in. Lawyers would circle. Careers would end. New ones would begin. But tonight, Earl sat on his porch, coffee cooling in his hands, listening to the quiet he had almost reached before the world pulled him back. He did not regret it. The system had noticed him once as an inconvenience. Now it would remember him as a line it could not cross again. And somewhere between the noise and the silence, between consequence and change, the story was no longer just his. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told to sit down, and chose instead to stand. The regulators arrived without fanfare. No press conference, no flashing lights. Just black sedans pulling into reserved spaces before most employees had finished their first cup of coffee. Badges were shown. Offices were entered. Hard drives were copied. Calendars were requested. The building felt different immediately, like a house that knows a storm has finally found it. Earl Thompson watched from a distance as the machinery of accountability did what it was designed to do when no one interfered. He did not guide them. He did not advise. His role was finished now, and he knew better than to confuse influence with ownership. Change only lasts when it outgrows the person who triggered it. In a conference room on the third floor, Michael Carter sat across from two federal investigators, jacket off, sleeves rolled, hands open on the table. He answered questions plainly. No defensiveness, no legal theatrics. When they asked about the culture, he did not deflect. When they asked about responsibility, he did not minimize. The word failure came from his mouth more than once, and each time it landed with more weight than an apology ever could. Down the hall, a senior executive packed personal items into a cardboard box under supervision. Family photos, a crystal paperweight, a plaque that read, "Leadership through Excellence." The irony was not lost on anyone. No one spoke as the box was sealed. In a smaller room near the back, Melissa Grant sat alone, hands folded in her lap, staring at the door that had not yet opened. She had been told charges were being considered. Assault, disorderly conduct. The words felt unreal, like they belonged to someone else's life. She thought of her first day in uniform, how proud she had been, how sure, how wrong. When the door finally opened, the officer did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He explained the process, the timeline, the next steps. Melissa nodded, absorbing each word as if it were water poured slowly over stone. She did not cry this time. Tears felt like an indulgence she no longer deserved. Outside, the story continued to mutate. Some outlets framed it as corporate courage, others as damage control. A few tried to turn Earl into a symbol, a banner people could wave without understanding the cost of carrying it. He refused every request. He did not correct them. He did not engage. Silence, he had learned, could still be useful when chosen deliberately. At a town hall convened for employees, Carter stood on a small stage with no teleprompter. He spoke for less than 10 minutes. He named what had happened. He named who had failed. He did not ask for trust. He said it would have to be earned, slowly, in ways that would not always be visible or comfortable. Some people applauded. Others did not. Both reactions were honest. Earl attended from the back of the room. He watched faces as Carter spoke. Some tight with fear, some with relief, some with resentment. Change never lands evenly. He slipped out before questions began, unnoticed, exactly as he preferred. That afternoon, Earl drove to a quiet cemetery on the edge of town. Rows of white markers stretched across green grass, orderly, precise. He parked, stepped out, and walked to a familiar stone. He stood there for a long time, hands in his pockets, wind brushing against his jacket. "I didn't plan this," he said softly. The stone did not answer. It never did. But standing there reminded him why he had not backed down, why he never would. On the drive home, his phone buzzed once. A message from Carter. "Regulators will remain for weeks. We're moving forward." Earl typed back a single word. Good. That evening, the news cycle shifted, as it always does. Another outrage, another clip, another name. But this one did not disappear entirely. It lingered. Not loud, but present. In training manuals being rewritten. In meetings that ended differently than they used to. In hands that hesitated before exerting power they could no longer assume was unquestioned. At the Veterans Center, someone taped a newspaper clipping to the bulletin board. No headline. Just the photo. The slap. Frozen. Below it, someone had written in pen, "Respect is not optional." Earl noticed it when he came by for coffee. He said nothing. He did not need to. Later, at home, he sat on his porch as dusk settled in. The air was cooler now, autumn close. A plane passed overhead, low and steady, its lights blinking against the darkening sky. He watched it until it disappeared. This was never about winning, he thought. It was about stopping something that should not have happened in the first place. The world would move on. It always did. But not exactly the same way it had before. And that, Earl knew, was enough. The first thing Earl Thompson noticed was the quiet, not the comforting kind that comes with relief, but the heavier silence that follows a storm after it has already reshaped the land. The review was over. The regulators had left behind binders, deadlines, and consequences. The boardroom lights no longer burned late into the night. What remained was something harder to measure, the afterimage of accountability, settling into places that had never expected to be seen. Earl stood in the doorway of the training center outside Denver, watching a new class of flight attendants take their seats. Different faces, different ages, some confident, some nervous. A few older than the rest, starting late in life, carrying stories no syllabus could capture. He listened as the instructor spoke, her tone deliberate, slower than it used to be. Words like de-escalation, dignity, proportional response were no longer footnotes. They were anchors. Earl did not interrupt. He did not introduce himself. He did not need to. This room was not about him. Outside, the wind cut across the tarmac, cold and clean. Earl pulled his jacket tighter and walked toward his car. His phone buzzed once in his pocket. A message from Michael Carter, brief and unadorned. The quarterly report had been released. Training reforms approved. Oversight committee installed. Carter added one more line. "I meant what I said. This doesn't end when the cameras stop." Earl believed him. Not because Carter was powerful, but because he had already paid a price. Power that survives consequence is rare, and when it appears, it has a chance to become something else. Across the city, Melissa Grant sat in a small apartment that did not feel like home yet. Boxes lined the walls, half unpacked, half abandoned. She worked mornings at a shipping warehouse now, scanning labels, lifting packages, doing a job where authority came from showing up on time and doing the work correctly. No uniform, no badge, no one stepping aside when she entered a room. Her cheek still flushed sometimes when she thought about the flight, about the moment everything fractured. She had stopped trying to explain herself. The words had run out. All that remained was learning how to live without the shield she had mistaken for strength. Some nights, she watched the planes overhead and wondered who was sitting where she once stood. She did not look away anymore. At a veterans center a few miles away, Earl sat at a long table with coffee gone cold, listening to a man talk about his grandson, about the questions children ask when they see something wrong and want to know if it will be made right. Earl nodded, hands folded, absorbing the weight of it. He had become a reference point now, whether he wanted it or not. Not a hero, something steadier. A reminder that restraint could be louder than rage. When he left, an older woman pressed a folded note into his hand. He waited until he was outside to read it. It said simply, "Thank you for standing when it mattered." He folded it carefully and slipped it into his wallet, beside photographs worn soft with time. Weeks passed. The story faded from the front pages, but it did not vanish. It lived on in policy changes and uncomfortable meetings, in the hesitation before a raised voice, in the recalibration of what authority looked like when it was no longer absolute. Earl returned to his routines. Morning walks, coffee on the porch, calls with old friends who did not need explanations. He was offered roles, panels, speaking engagements. He declined most of them. Change, he knew, did not require a microphone to survive. One afternoon, at an airport far from the one where it had all begun, Earl boarded a flight quietly, taking his seat without incident. A young flight attendant paused beside him, checking her tablet, then looked up and smiled. "Thank you for your patience, sir." Her tone was calm, respectful, unforced. She moved on without waiting for acknowledgement. Earl felt something loosen in his chest. As the plane lifted, he watched the ground fall away, the lines of the city softening into abstraction. He thought of the slap not as a wound, but as a fracture that had revealed something brittle underneath. He thought of the people who had spoken only after someone else had gone first. He thought of how easily silence could disguise itself as order. The engines settled into their steady rhythm. The cabin lights dimmed. Around him, people read, slept, stared out the window at nothing in particular. Ordinary life, resuming its quiet work. Earl closed his eyes and breathed, feeling the plane carry him forward. He did not know what stories would come next, or who would need to stand, or when. He only knew that dignity was not a performance. It was a choice, made repeatedly, often without witnesses, and always with consequence. Somewhere below, systems adjusted. Somewhere ahead, questions waited. Earl was not done, but he was at peace with that. He had learned that endings were rarely clean, and that was all right. What mattered was that lines had been drawn, and once drawn, they could be defended. The world would keep testing them, and people would keep deciding where to stand. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and comment 3 words.